Hey guys, we're going to talk about some different openings that we can use to hard counter e4. A lot of times your opponents will go ahead and play e4, and you're looking about for an opening to carry yourself out and gain elo. So what are the top three openings to do this? There's a lot of openings out there, right? People will tell you all sorts of things. They'll tell you, you gotta play the center counter defense, you gotta play e5, you gotta play the Sicilian, you gotta play Alekins, that's the one that'll throw them off. But what are the real three power picks that are really present right now in 2015? So going in order, we'll go to first, number three. And number three is the Caro defense. Now, why is the Caro defense so strong in the current meta? And the reason is because it provides so much outplay potential, yet remains a very solid pick. For example, d4, d5, as is well known, White has his basically three main moves here. Edicts d5 has long fallen out of the meta due to there's just this clear solidity of the pan of Botvinnik. This stuff is just so solid these days. And black, of course, has several options here already. You can play bishop e7. You can go ahead and play the older move, bishop b4, which is also completely fine. In both of these, what will happen is White's definitely playing with this isolated queen pawn here. And that's kind of just fallen out of the meta in general lately, if you've seen. There might be some cases in the Nimza where White will voluntarily go in for the isolated queen pawn, but in general, White's not really willing to bear this if you've looked at the current meta right now. Because the problem is that the onus is really on White, right, in these kinds of positions to really prove himself. And that whole concept has really fallen out of favor amongst the top players right now because it's so much stress and there's not really a safety net if you really need one, which is not ideal in those types of tournaments. In open tournaments, this could be more advisable, but even so, the objective strength of this opening is still quite in debate, and it's not as if White has a very clear advantage in these positions. So the main positions that really result from the Caro are basically going to be knight c3, which is, I would say, 60% of the time, and e5, 40% of the time. And in the e5 meta, the thing is, what's happened after the boom of the short variation in 2012 is that Black has found some ways to go about countering this. For example, in the c5 variation, Black has found ways to neutralize White's pawn sacks. And lately in 2015, Vachier Lagrave has shown that even playing knight d7 here and going more slowly, let's say knight e7, and then maybe retreating the bishop if needed, and then I will go ahead and go to f5 if necessary, or c8 is another typical maneuver, and then the bishop will be able to go release. And I think that c8 is not such a bad square because what will happen is the knight will eventually get rerouted anyway. And so generally Black will be able to ultimately achieve this c5, his c6, c5 pawn break. And so that means Black will be able to achieve his main plans. And so far, White hasn't been able to really found any real strong counters to this. So because of the demise, relatively, of the short variation, the Caro is really strong right now. Another pick, of course, that happens quite frequently, also in elite levels and club plays knight c3. But even here, and basically everyone right now is just playing bishop f5. That is by far looking to be the strongest move. And in these positions, it's looking as if Black is really quite solid, thanks to the revival of castle kingside ideas in the last 10 years. And with the development of certain lines, certain computers, in addition to ideas with when the queen goes to a5, to d5, and then sometimes d5 to e4, with the support of the knight on f6. This has really lended the Caro solidity as an opening, where you can get to a pretty equal game with equal chances. Solid endgames can arise, and you can make outplays from there. And so, in that sense, you're taking relatively little risk, but also providing good chances to outplay the opponent, which is perfect. I mean, there are some imbalances in the opening, and the Kann is gradually leaving its reputation as a formerly drawish opening that was for a long time. It was seen as this drawish opening. But the thing is, you can always play on this strength or weakness, and that is the eternal question, really, in these variations in the Caro-Kanns, whether the h5 pawn acts as strength or weakness. And if one's not really able to crash through on the kingside attacks with g2, g4, then it really becomes a question. And the endgames can often be quite interesting as well. So that's the current standpoint of the Caro-Kann. Now, at the number 2 pick, we have e7, e5. That is the immortal answer to e4, symmetrical answer to e4, quite decent, always and forever. Very old. The Ruy Lopez is going to be a power pick for a very long time now, and it will continue to do so. The closed variation in particular has stood the most strength, although open Ruy Lopez is also finding some resurgence lately as well, thanks to work such as the Grandmaster Repertoire series. Victor Michalewski has done some good work to try to boost his reputation. But even so, bishop e7 will remain the critical line of choice. And with the Marshall's Gambit, still very popular, still very strong, and with its advent supporter, Levon Aronian, the Marshall is looking to stay. Also, of course, there is still, of course, the closed Ruy Lopez, and very strong as usual. It is just very strong for outplays because all the pieces are remaining on the board. It's going to be a tense fight. There's going to be a battle, a very classical battle, determined on the battleground of the center. And so black has many choices here, which also aid its general appeal to players because there's so many different ways and it's very rich. So there, of course, is the classical Chigorin, for example, with knight a5, bishop c2, and then c5, d4, queen c7. There's even the Gleck variation, knight c7, off-meta picks. There's all sorts of richness that's available in the Ruy Lopez that really lends itself as a winning try against e4 because there's so many different ways you can go about mixing it up, and that can really go about a long way toward throwing off your opponents. Of course, there's also other variations, not least to mention Svidler's recent attempts with the Breyer variation with knight b8, knight b7, this repositioning idea so that this c7 pawn is more free to move. And so this is sort of reminiscent of the Philidor, for example. Black will go ahead and fiend shadow the bishop, and he'll be able to gradually regroup his pieces, establish a double fiend shadow, always very strong, has a lot of latent energy, and there's a lot of explosive play that can be set up later on in the middle game, which is great because that's where the outplays will really come into effect. And finally, at our number 1 pick will be the Sicilian. Now, of course, the Sicilian is a very large family. There's a lot of different Sicilians, and we're going to focus on 2 main Sicilians in this particular edition. And the first of which is going to be the Kann Sicilian. This is a Sicilian that's just very strong for making individual outplays because so much of it requires on mid-game knowledge and decision making, and so much requires, and there's so many requirements for both players to make accurate judgments onto how the attacks will go about and how to play the hedgehog structures. I mean, hedgehog structures in general are just incredibly strong ways to establish some sort of middle game counterplay opportunities for black, because in the hedgehog there's so much tension and everything is just a waiting time bomb, and so you have to correctly set it up and make sure to make the right waiting moves. There's a very interesting learning curve to these positions. Sorry. And there's also just a lot of opportunity for outplays. There aren't so many trades. The endgames are generally favorable for black. So this means that white will have to go for a pretty fighting game, go for a kingside attack eventually. And so that makes for a lot of fun. bishop e3, queen c7, c4, knight f6, knight c3, maybe bishop c5, knight b3, bishop c7. You don't really need to do that maneuver. That's fine. Bishop 3, d6. And this is basically going to be the hedgehog. This is the hedgehog right here. And it's just very strong for making individual outplays. There's a lot of, there's a recent set of monographs published by Sergei Shipov on the hedgehog, and that really goes into depth about all the different mid-game spikes you might want to know, all the different pawn breaks that are possible, the b7, b5 pawn break, the extremely volatile, extremely strong pawn break, d6, d5, and just really getting to know these structures and the different plans you can do is incredibly strong and provides a lot of outplay potential to beat lower rated and equal rated opponents and possibly provide fighting chances against higher rated opponents. And finally, the Sicilian is the historical favorite, the Najdorf. The Najdorf is just so sharp, it's so counterattacking and so strong, even in today's meta. So much is not well known because even today in the poison pawn, the computers can't delve deep enough, and so there's a lot of exciting play still left. And of course, there are many new editions of the Najdorf that are gradually coming out here. For example, bishop d5, knight b7, and so e6 is not even necessarily even the only move here anymore. And so with these newfangled plans that came out of the meta in late 2010, 2011, Black is continuing to find good counterplay chances. Najdorf, of course, is just a razor-sharp opening. The English attack also continues to be a sharp battleground, and in these positions, a lot depends on the individual player, and that makes room for a lot of outplays. For example, in these positions, it's not even necessary to castle anymore, because when white plays f3, there are also newfangled variations coming out with, and a lot of corresponding games are featuring this as well. And this just stops a lot of white kings that attack. There are some interesting sharp variations that are going on here. It's very in the meta right now, very interesting, and there's a lot of fighting chances for both sides. And that provides a lot of counterplay and outplay potential. So I hope we enjoyed this series. We'll continue on with looking at some of the other first moves, and hope you liked it. Thanks.